let's jump into the big kahuna, man. I mean, I think the biggest game of the weekend and the game that's on everybody's mind is the Texas A&M game. Um, it's been a while since we've seen this one, man. It's the Lone Star Showdown. Last played in 2011 before Texas A&M had moved over to the SEC. And the winner of this one is going to face off against the Georgia Bulldogs in Atlanta for the SEC championship. So not only is there bragging rights and an in-state rivalry on the line here, but there's an SEC championship in the balance, and possibly, obviously for Texas A&M, if they win here, they get a chance to win their way to the college football playoff, right? So tons on the line here. This one's going to be played at Kyle Field. Texas is currently a 5.5-point favorite where I saw. I see we've got 5 on the screen here. I'm sure you can find either one. Over under 48.5 is what I'm seeing most places. This one's going down 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. Mason, I think this game really kind of boils down to I don't think it necessarily boils down to one thing, but the biggest thing and the number one thing that comes to my mind whenever I look at this game is the Texas A&M run game going to be able to control this game, or are they going to be forced and bottled up and forced into obvious passing situations, which I think would give Texas a big advantage in this football game, right? So if Texas A&M, an offense that's been run-centric this season, to say the least, if they're not able to run the football here, this is going to be a really tough game to win. Because this Texas secondary, I think, is really, really, really good. I know they haven't faced a ton of awesome passing attacks and things, but everything about them has been really good this season. You can't really pick on any one thing. They've done a good job turning teams over as well. And I just really like the back end of this Texas defense. And honestly, that's kind of a surprise to me at this point, because early in the season, that was something that we talked about that really needed to improve. And Steve Kwiatkowski has done a really good job, I feel like, addressing those needs with, guys like Andrew Makuba. And I think Michael Taft really has stepped up for the Longhorns this season in a big, big way. So I think a lot of this has to do with the Texas defense, that defensive line, particularly the middle of that defensive line. Texas has been good against the run. They haven't been outstanding. I'm interested to see how that defensive line is going to end up holding up against what I think is a pretty good running attack. What are your thoughts here, and what's kind of like your, I guess, keys to victory for each of these teams? Like I said, Texas A&M got to be able to run the football. Texas got to be able to stop the run and get Texas A&M and Marcel Reed, who's a young quarterback. He's done well this year, guys, as well as you could probably ask for in most cases. But he's still a young guy. He's not a polished product. He's not a finished product. And if you're telling me that he is going to have to go head to head for the win here against this Texas secondary, then I'm really not sure. I'm really not sure that I like that matchup for Texas A&M and Marcel Reed particularly. Gonna have to have some contribution from that run game. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, looking at Texas A&M, what's kind of surprising is that Marcel Reed, as young as he is, as inexperienced as he is, as much of a great runner as he is, he's actually better than Quinn Ewers when it comes to passing efficiency. Now, Texas A&M doesn't pass the ball a ton, but when Marcel Reed passes the football, he tends to get more on an average yards per attempt, at least, than Quinn Ewers does, which is kind of surprising for when you compare these two quarterbacks. Can Marcel Reed against this defense continue that success, right? And can he do it more? That's kind of my question. Is if they do get into a situation where they're not able to run the football as efficiently, can they lean on the passing game? Right? Do they have the weapons on the perimeter to match up against these DBs, which I agree are really good. They've been very solid this year, and have success. That is the biggest question to me. I do think that they do have some success in the run game, but I don't think you go into this matchup against Texas and think that you're going to run the football to a win necessarily. It's just not going to happen. This is a really good defense. They're actually playing even better than they started the year on the lines of scrimmage. In particular, in the pass rush, I think that you do still have some holes in the run game a little bit on defense. So maybe Texas A&M can exploit that to an extent. But when Marcel Reed drops back to pass the football, I think he's got to get that ball out pretty quick. Keep the DBs a little bit off balance, and then also the pass rush has been coming along really well. Colin Simmons is looking great. Anthony Hill has been really good as a pass rusher as well. So I'm anxious to see kind of how this offense plays this football game because I do think that Texas has one of the best defenses in the country. Now on the flip side, I think Wisner has been good as of late for Texas, but I don't really like Texas's run game against Texas A&M here. I think you're going to
Right.
see more screen passes, more of the pass game being an extension of the run game from Texas. Look, they've been doing that all year. It's exactly what the NFL does. Short passes and don't let your quarterback get exploited downfield too much. Let's get 4 yards on a pass play and we'll be okay with that if it's first down. That's been Steve Sarkisian's mo this season, and I think that you'll see them continue to do that because if Texas A&M's defense is going to be exploited in some capacity, it's going to be with their DBs. I'm particularly interested to see how their DBs tackle in space in this against these wide receivers. I think that they have been a little bit lacking when it comes to physicality for the most part, and mostly on the perimeters. Great defenses, flighted the football on all in all 11 positions, including the DBs. I haven't seen a lot of that from Texas A&M this year, so they'll be challenged by these wide receivers, who I do think are pretty good for Texas. But I'm anxious to see how Texas A&M responds defensively and do their defensive backs in particular play with a little bit more physicality than they have in recent weeks.
And speaking of that, starting cornerbacks Will Lee and Jaden Hill both went down last week.
Mm-hmm.
So that's obviously a very big question in this game whenever you're going against Texas. Um, Look, I'm going to read through some of the stats and kind of some of the stuff that I compiled about each of these teams, and you can see the stats here on your screen. If you're just listening and not looking, you can look at your screen, and we've got stats for each team kind of cycling through on there. But and look, I mean, you nailed it. A lot of what you talked about with Texas. I mean, there's really no statistic, that you don't like defensively for Texas. Offensively, you maybe like them to be a little bit better rushing the ball, but you can understand why it would be that way. 59th in the country rush yards per game at 170, basically. They've had injuries at the running back position. I mean, that's pretty clear. And not to mention, I think they've gone up against some better defensive lines this year than what they did last year in the Big 12. I think that's, I think that's pretty accurate. But just going through some of this, um, Texas Texas is eighth in the SEC right now in rush yards per game, as we talked about 170 yards per game, and fourth in the SEC in pass yards per game. Um, Texas A&M is going to have to figure out a way to generate some pressure here on Texas. Texas has been pretty good at protecting the quarterback. I wouldn't say great. It started off great this season, and I think it's been a little more rocky here of late. But you got to get pressure on Quinn Ewers here if you're Texas A&M. There's no doubt about that. And that's easier said than done because Texas can go into that mode that you're talking about where they're getting the ball out quick and getting it out wide and spreading you out 52 yards wide. And that's a big part of Steve Sarkisian and what he wants to do offensively. And so you're right, Mason. Those cornerbacks are going to be put on an island out there, and they're going to be asked to cover, and they're going to be asked to tackle as well. So that's going to be super interesting, no doubt. Um, this is the best total defense statistically in the SEC. That is Texas. Now, let's look at who they've played, Mason, and I think it's worth talking about here, and I'll put the Texas stats back up here, and they're great. They're amazing. Texas has done exactly what they're supposed to do against each of these opponents, okay? But listen to some of these offenses. Michigan, Mississippi State, which Mississippi State it's turned out to be a decent little offense, but whenever Texas played Mississippi State earlier this year, that was Van Buren's very first game ever. And I believe it was at Texas. So take that with a grain of salt, I guess. But Michigan, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, and we're going to talk more about Vanderbilt today. But I mean, we'll look at their offensive numbers; not very good. Florida, at the time they played Florida too. I mean, they literally had no quarterback at all. And Kentucky hasn't had a quarterback all damn season. So look, the Kentucky one, Kentucky's got like a decent defense and stuff. So they're a little more formidable, but still a terrible team. I, there hasn't. It's not a killer's row here, Mason, of offenses that Texas has faced. And whenever they have faced a good offense, I would consider Georgia to have a good offense. Definitely not great, but you give up points. Now Georgia was a beneficiary of some short fields and things like that, but Georgia's offense was pretty efficient that day and scored points and over 30 of them in that game. Um, and look, a lot of these statistics as well, offensively, Mason, it's a bit of a facade. Okay. I'm just going to be honest with you. 7.46 yards per play is Texas versus non-power 5 this season, and only 5.94 yards per play versus the power 5. So, I mean, there's a big, and that's a few games that are mixed in. So you take away some of the cupcake games here, and you're looking at 5.94 yards per play. That's not very good offensively, and it doesn't rank very high in the nation either. Against the, excuse me, that was for Texas A&M there. But against Texas A&M, against their top 2 opponents this season, South Carolina and Notre Dame, they've lost by a combined 34 points. So both of these teams somehow kind of made it through this SEC schedule, missing a few of the big boys, and they've capitalized on that. I'm really, really interested to see what this Texas offense looks like on the road at Kyle Field at night. This is a real test for them, probably their biggest test of the year. And the first big test, they failed against Georgia. Is Texas A&M's defense as good as Georgia's? I don't think so. But that was also played in Austin. So here they go on the road to College Station. This is going to be a really tough situation. 5.5 yards per play on the road this season for Texas, 7.05 at home. So, again, there's a discrepancy between their home and away and against the Power 5 teams and the non-Power 5 teams here. So, and they're also averaging 100 less yards per game on the road. So, this one's hard to call for me, man. And we've talked about this game ad nauseum throughout the season because we've been waiting on it. We said from the very beginning of the season, you and I both talked about it, that the winner of this game is going to the SEC championship. We've said it for a couple of months now, and we both liked Texas A&M in this spot earlier this season. I'm not backing off of it. There's nothing that showed me from Texas that their offense is ready to go in here and dominate. Could their defense dominate this game? Absolutely, they could. But I think Texas A&M is going to be able to hold this offense of Texas in check. So, with that being said, I like Texas A&M to cover the spread here, and I think I kind of like the under, but I don't really like where that number's at. It's at 48.5. I'd like it at 49 or 49.5. To be honest with you, to take that under. So take that for what you will, but give me Texas A&M plus the points here because both of these teams still have something to prove to me, and somehow we still don't know everything there is to know about these teams. Something's missing with this Texas offense. I think it might come back to bite them in the butt here this week. What are your thoughts? I could keep going on and on about this game. Do we see some Arch Manning in this game if Quinn Ewers struggles? I think the answer to that is yes. Y'all let us know in the comment section. This is a big juicy matchup here. Mason, what do you think?
Well, do we know that Quinn Ewers is going to play in this game 100%? I mean, there's no
They said
question.
he is. They said he is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't figure he would be hurt, but I know there were some some stirrings going on, I guess, in Austin about that. I'm with you, Mark. I do think that Texas A&M can cover in this football game. My question though is there a possibility that both of these teams are just mediocre and they're facing one another and they're both mediocre? Because I think that we propped up Texas A&M because of the LSU win, and it I mean, if you looked at the score sheet, 38-23, Texas A&M wins at home, you would think, wow, that's a pretty decisive win. But then you factor in the fact that LSU was up in that game pretty big at one point, and it looked like they were going to cruise to a win. And Nussmeier turns the ball over a few times, and you just can't do that on the road in the SEC at all. Texas A&M capitalizes on it with some short field, and they were able to convert some of those drives into touchdowns and whatnot. My point is, I don't think that Texas A&M just dominated LSU, and since then we've seen LSU, who was at the peak of where they were going into that game against Texas A&M. LSU has dropped down a few pegs too, so
Mm-hmm.
that's not a huge win. You have to kind of look through the Texas A&M schedule to find some good wins. 41-10 over Missouri. I'll give you that. That was at home. Missouri's not that great. They beat Mississippi State by 10 points. Beat Arkansas by 4 points. Beat Florida, who was terrible at the beginning of the year, by 13 points. And lost to Notre Dame. So lost huge to South Carolina. Just lost to Auburn. I think it's safe to say that Texas A&M is pretty average, and they're lucky to be ranked at this point. My question is, what do we know about Texas? I mean, you kind of broke down the schedule. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but here recently, I mean, they won by 17 against Kentucky, took care of business. Kentucky has all but quit this season, by the way. They don't even know what quarterback they're using week to week. And then, a 10-point win over Arkansas on the road. That's a pretty good win. But I don't think I just feel like this Texas team and offensively, 20 points against Arkansas is not great.
Yeah, that's the thing. The defense in all those games, the defense has done what they needed to do every single
Yeah,
time. They have been one
yeah,
of the most consistent units in the country. Them, Ohio State's defense, Notre Dame's defense, those defenses have been very, very convincing over and over and over
yeah.
this season. But you could also say that those defenses have been maybe a little less tested than others.
Right. And so at the end of this game, if we're sitting here with Texas A&M losing by 3 points to Texas, I don't think that I'm gonna go or walk away from that game thinking, "Wow, Texas A&M's actually pretty good. They're actually really good. They could upset anybody." I'm gonna point to Texas and say, is that really a top 5 team in the country? And I'll be looking at that SEC championship feeling pretty good as a Georgia fan. But if Texas comes out and dominates and wins this game by 3 scores, yeah, I'll be the first one to say I was wrong. I just don't see it. I like Texas A&M, especially at home, not just to cover. I like them to win this football game, actually. And as far as the over/under, I'm going with the under in this one. I did get you another point at 49.5. I was able to find that, because we are doing our bet show here later on tonight. So I was definitely looking at that line. So 49.5 there for the line. Give me the under.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I said at the top of the segment here, can the Texas A&M run game control the game? They're going to need to be able to run the football and control time of possession and limit possessions in general for Texas. And I think Texas A&M has got a chance to do that. I think they've got a chance to do that in that matchup against the interior of that defensive line. We're going to see this is going to be a big one, 7:30 p.m. Saturday. Let us know in the comment section what's your score prediction for this one. It's the Lone Star Showdown 2024 edition.